Spawn of the Movies. From The New Yorker, January 9th, 1971. Reprinted in Deeper into Movies. Alex, played by Donald Sutherland, a movie director, has made only one movie, which has been previewed, but has not yet been released. His fretting and fantasizing over his next project are the subject of Alex in Wonderland. I would say the book does not have fantasizing, but it has fantasying. It's too bad that the writers, Paul Mazursky, who directed, and Larry Tucker, who produced, never chose to reveal what sort of first movie it was that Alex had directed. Because if it was anything like Bob and Carol and Ted and Alice, the debut film that made Mazursky's and Tucker's reputation, Alex's felony-esque fantasy sequences might have gained some badly needed comic resonance. But since Mazursky and Tucker don't make the joke, it's a joke on them that men with a talent for situation comedy and review humor, men who are best when the camera barely moves, are busily creating fiery apocalyptic visions for their hero. It's a bad joke because their small satirical comedy gift is rare. If the imitation of 8½, were used for self-parody, as Alex's way of putting himself down, the fantasies might reverberate in his everyday life. But as it has been done, the fantasies don't work on enough levels to be suggestive. Alex's fantasy life has no intensity. It's a series of emotionally antiseptic reveries, staged like the big production numbers in a musical. The flattery of Fellini is so sincere and single-edged that after Mazursky and Tucker went through God knows what machinations to get Fellini himself to appear in this film, they failed to provide him with good material. They must have thought his presence would work magic, but he adds nothing. He's very tight, very dull. Mazursky and Tucker had been on to something fresh, an affectionate, ambivalent way of observing the contradictions in how we live. Fortunately, some of that observation still shows in the non-fantasy sections of Alex in Wonderland, in the domestic scenes of Alex, his wife, played by Ellen Burstyn, and their 2 daughters, and in the ambience of the New Hollywood. The film comes out of a true Wonderland, the chaotic New Hollywood, where the anti-establishment filmmakers have become the establishment, and the establishment executives pose as anti-establishment. In this Wonderland, some studio heads may actually have been appointed to make movies, but others appear to have been appointed to dismantle the studios. During the auction of MGM artifacts last spring, Alex in Wonderland and Roger Vadim's Pretty Maids All in a Row starring Rock Hudson were the only movies in production on the lot. The ads for Alex in Wonderland show Sutherland's great hairy head in the MGM Lion's niche, and Alex in Wonderland captures for the first time on the screen the palmy hip look of the New Hollywood. The 60s swingers have now adopted the prophetic saintly style, which is super relaxed. Bearded producers come out of their Polynesian Tudor homes, wearing Indian headbands and talking revolution with the fashionable pauses and non-sequiturs of their Beverly Hills high-stoned adolescents. Mazursky and Tucker, with their background in improvisational review, slip into the new idioms and rhythms and wriggle around in them comfortably. MGM is cuddling vipers, and the vipers love being cuddled. Mazursky doesn't overdo the waggish architecture of Los Angeles. The Spanish house that Alex considers buying is by some standards an atrocity, but it's probably heaven to live in. The movie doesn't put down the unbuttoned look of movie people. It accepts their adaptation to the sun. And it tries to do justice to the curious situation of talented Jews raising their children to believe in Martin Luther King and Gandhi, while they themselves are harboring fantasies of an armed uprising of blacks taking over Beverly Hills, and are so divided against themselves that they are, of course, for the blacks. The satire of Hollywood is exact, and it's loving without losing its bite, although the film's only real triumph is malicious. A long review skit in which Alex goes to lunch with a producer, Hal Stern, played by Mazursky. Mazursky pulls the picture together in this sequence, the way Mel Brooks's brief appearance on screen turns the 12 chairs into what it should have been. Mazursky's Hal Stern, in his Richard III haircut, and with his shirt hanging out over his roll of flab, struts like a baby boy whose parents patted him on the head for every step he ever took. His personality is so clearly defined that we know his phony new openness to any idea as soon as we see him. The propositions he offers Alex, a script on a heart transplant, Don Quixote as a Western, are the projects that directors have been getting offered. If this level of satirical accuracy had been sustained, the movie might have been a classic, even written as it is. If Mazursky had played Alex, and played him as a sharp, tough hipster who's making it big in Hollywood, Alex's dreams of directing art films might have been exposed as the current Hollywood fashion in dreams. But Sutherland's Alex is nebulous and glamorous, and his dreams seem to be intended as expressions of creativity. Sutherland isn't bad, he's loose and he has a soft-spoken way with dialogue, but we get no sense of a person there, or of what kind of drive or talent is hidden in his flowing beard and his picture hats. He's wonderful when he leans back in fatuous satisfaction as Jean Moreau, who appears briefly as herself, sings to him. But he's so cool he drifts away while you're watching him. One of the dangers of Mazursky's casual style is that if a scene doesn't come off, it's really dead, like the supermarket scene here, or the handheld camera sequence in the empty Spanish house. But for a dithering film, Alice in Wonderland has a surprising number of good things. A long traveling shot of the Baroque ceiling of an old picture palace, ending at the popcorn counter. A vision of Alex and Jean Moreau in a carriage drawn by white horses on a Hollywood overpass. The offhand performance of Mazursky's daughter Meg as Alex's intelligent, sensible 12-year-old. The accuracy of Ellen Burstyn's tight-jawed portrait of the competent yet distraught Hollywood wife, one of those wives whose jaws get a hard set from the nights when they sit soberly at parties waiting to take their sloshed geniuses home. Hollywood wives often seem to have been chosen because they're great drivers. But, good as he is on the new Hollywood, Mazursky can't get a satirical grip on the old Hollywood. When the voice of a very young Doris Day is heard singing Hooray for Hollywood over a satirical fantasy of guerrilla violence on Hollywood Boulevard, the device backfires because at least she knew what she was doing and Mazursky doesn't. When a freestyle conversation is going on in Alex's bedroom while Harlow and Tracy are on the screen in Riff Raff, we want to listen to the voices on the box because there isn't enough conviction on Mazursky's part or on Sutherland's part that Alex's conversation is worth listening to. The film's informality is promising, but it's almost as if the modern disintegration of drama and conventional movie structures had disoriented precisely those who might have been expected to use the flux creatively. The hacks go on as if nothing much had changed, while the talented people are so afraid of failing to be unconventional enough that they fall apart. It is right in a way that Alex's ideas are not much better than the projects Hal Stern offers him. It is right that he is despondent because all he has is the instinct to know how crummy Stern's ideas are. But this irony, that directors who finally get into a position to do what they want to do don't know what they want to do, which is potentially the biggest joke in the new Hollywood, isn't developed. It isn't developed even though Alex in Wonderland is a reflection of it. Afraid that any subject they might select would be considered square, student filmmakers, using 8.5 as their model, often begin with a spoof of their own dilemma, their search for a great subject. The subject of the film thus becomes their own empty-headedness, and that's the subject of Mazursky and Tucker's Alex in Wonderland. Brewster McCloud, directed by Robert Altman, whose last film was MASH, opens with a derisive remark coming in over the MGM lion's roar. In Alex in Wonderland, movie colony schoolchildren sing Over the Rainbow. In this one, the Wicked Witch herself, Margaret Hamilton, sings The Star-Spangled Banner off-key at the Houston Astrodome and dies in her ruby slippers. Brewster McCloud is almost as full of movie quotes and references as Alex in Wonderland, but they're not linked to a director figure. They're not really linked to much of anything. The picture is irreverent and parodistic, like a Roadrunner cartoon, though it doesn't have the clear pattern or the established characters of a cartoon. The conception is amorphous. There's no frame of reference beyond the general notion of the life of the imagination, represented by Brewster, building wings to fly with, versus the rude, soulless materialists, Stacy Keach as a miserly old billionaire, the patriotic croaking witch, a racist, sadist narcotics agent, and so on. Gentle Brewster, played by Bud Cort, is a weird conceit, a boy phantom of the Astrodome who is also the imperiled virgin, a sort of mad, murderous Peter Pan, or Rima the bird boy. It appears that he would be able to fly, with the help of his fairy godmother guardian angel, played by Sally Kellerman, but she deserts him when he loses his virginity. She has lost her own wings. We are not told whether from the same cause or why in this liberated atmosphere sex and taking flight are mutually exclusive, as in a Victorian fable. We should be able to grasp intuitively what Brewster is meant to represent, but whatever Altman had in mind doesn't emerge in Brewster's disconsolate baby face. The picture has a demoralized, melancholy, yet silly tone. It isn't noisy, but it's somewhat manic. It's disconnected in a way that could be explained as social comment or as a new free style, but I don't think it is either. Altman has a distinctive, easygoing use of overlapping sound, and the track sometimes has an independent life, and he has a distinct sense of film rhythm. But the individual sequences don't reveal what they're for. They can be taken in almost any way, and when they're all put together, the picture has no driving impulse and no internal consistency. The ambiguities, such as whether Brewster or the fallen angel lady or a mysterious crow commits the murders, seem more like a form of indecision than like purposeful ambiguity. And yet, it all appears to be done with considerable directorial confidence, as if Altman didn't know that the gags were schoolboy humor, the characterization vague, and the dialogue a shambles. Most of the members of the cast are weak, probably because They are playing almost unwritten roles, and the gaps haven't been plugged by improvisation. When an actor is supposed to parody a Steve McQueen hot-shot San Francisco police detective, but is given almost nothing to work with except the repeated exclamation, "Jesus Christ," the effect isn't parody, and it isn't comedy. It's like a rehearsal, with the actors just saying anything while waiting for the script to arrive. The new Western, There Was a Crooked Man, seems to have been written by an evil 2-year-old, and it has been directed in the Grand Rapids style of filmmaking, but it's a movie pastiche, too. Everything in it is stolen from old movies and stood on its head. The clichés are just as stale upside down and are presented as leering realism. While the traditional Westerns gradually settled into the John Wayne mold, the strong, silent man of action for the silent majority, in the 60s, the form began to be used in a new spirit of cynicism, as in the spaghetti westerns and such American hits as The Professionals. There Was a Crooked Man represents a new low in cynicism. Joseph L. Mankiewicz, who directed, and David Newman and Robert Benton, who wrote the script, would probably say that it merely mirrored the meaninglessness of a corrupt, polluted world. But the sophisticated amorality of this picture, which glorifies a mercenary killer, played by Kirk Douglas, and makes cheap fun of prison reform, is fundamentally ugly, and the more so because it is done in such a self-satisfied, aren't-we-clever style. This picture is far more reactionary than the John Wayne pictures, since it ridicules any beliefs or ideals beyond gratifying one's own greed. Kirk Douglas, red-haired this time, as if he weren't flamboyant enough, is a smart, wisecracking robber-killer who is sent to a territorial prison in the Arizona desert in the 1880s. He becomes the leader of the prisoners, and for his own purposes, cooperates with Henry Fonda, the warden, in changing the prison from a brutalizing place into a decent one. The film, however, wouldn't dream of being square and standing for any kind of decency. It plays murderous double-crossing games until any characters with a decent impulse are dead fools or have become crooked. There's nobody to root for but Douglas, the charmer jokester who cold-bloodedly wipes out all his buddies and most of the rest of the prison population. Kirk Douglas is maybe the least relaxed and least subtle of enduring screen stars. He's on all the time. He holds your attention without really interesting you. But he's a commanding presence, and Mankiewicz uses him for that cocky magnetism. The picture just keeps chugging along, but it has Douglas and a group of actors working to steal as many scenes as possible, Hume Cronyn playing a homosexual in the worked-up style that makes you certain he's played a homosexual on the stage recently, Martin Gable, Burgess Meredith, Warren Oates, John Randolph. It isn't altogether boring, but it does seem as if the only rationale Mankiewicz and Newman and Benton had was to make a movie that wouldn't be boring. Would the story have emerged as a spoof western, kidding the heroic clichés, if it had been directed in a lighter spirit? I don't think so. The cynicism goes very deep, as flies to wanton boys are the characters to Newman and Benton. When the implications of a plot are not considered, when the writers and the director don't take the responsibility for the meaning of what they're working on, they are defining themselves as hacks. I thought it a despicable movie, not because I believe that audiences will take its commercialized nihilism very seriously, but because of its clay heart. Is it naive to ask how, when our prisons are packed with the uneducated, the addicted, and the retarded, thinking men can make such a picture? Look under them amorality, and you'll find the true amorality. January 9th, 1971. Thank you for listening.